Hello and welcome to Pressed Plants in Your Nature Journal with Marley Peifer. We are so glad you're joining us today. My name is Beth Kelly Galogly and I'm on the team here at the Wild Wonder Foundation. The Wild Wonder Foundation is dedicated to encouraging nature connection and conservation through attention, curiosity, art, science, and community. That's where you come in. You can learn more about our work at wildwonder.org. We are grateful to today's teacher, Marley Peifer, should be appearing here shortly, an avid longtime nature journaler and a nature journal educator. He longs for reintegration of art with science and words with images, a synthesis he develops in his journals. Hey, Marley. As an educator, Marley is constantly sharing, inspiring, and provoking learning in nature and on paper. This class is a fundraiser for Wild Wonder, and all funds raised support our many free and low-cost resources that help people connect with nature. Thank you for your support and for helping share the joy of nature journaling with others through your generosity. A few notes before we begin. I want to give a special shout out and big thank you to Avea Moore, who is helping backstage. Thanks, Avea. Because this is a webinar, your camera and mic are disabled. This is a 90-minute class. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions during the presentation, and we will get to as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. Please also share your class notes and drawings on socials using hashtag Wild Wonder Foundation and tag us at Wild Wonder Foundation. I will now hand it over to you, Marley.
Yay! Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here, and we're going to talk about pressed plants in our nature journals. Let's dive right in. Thanks to Beth and Ivea. Okay, so first thing I'm going to show you, before we even talk any about why you should be interested in pressed plants in your nature journal, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the two-step method. And this is just to show you and to start the class off with how easy this can be. You take a plant, you open your journal, you put it down, and you close your journal. So that is the two-step method of pressing plants. And I just want to start us off with that, because sometimes we overthink things, we read about things, we watch videos about things, and I just want to let you know that watching videos and thinking about nature journaling is not nature journaling, and thinking about pressing plants and buying stuff to press plants is not pressing plants. So just remember that there's always the possibility of the two-step method that I just showed you. And that's something that children can do. That's something that you can do without overthinking it. But now that I said that part, I will go a little bit more into depth, but I just really wanted to start things off with how simple this can really be. This is something that is accessible for all of us, even if you're like in an apartment and you have houseplants. This is from the office building that I'm in right now. You could probably take a few leaves off of there and nobody would notice. And we'll talk about ethics later. But the first thing I want to say is a little bit about why you should be interested in pressing plants and why you should combine it with your nature journaling. The first thing is speed. So if you are painting and drawing a plant, it's going to be a lot slower than pressing it. So speed. There's also accuracy. You can get details in a pressed plant that would take you hours to draw, and maybe you don't have that accuracy yet with your drawing. So speed, accuracy. There's also a Pokemon effect. So this is that fun of collecting things. And it's, if you've ever experienced it with birding, there's something to be said for creating a list and collecting things, and you can experience that when you are using pressed plants. I also do want to mention the voucher concept, and this is a concept that was used in herbal medicine. You would send a pressed plant along with the medicine. That way people could be sure, even if this plant had confusing different names, they could see the pressed plant and that was the voucher. This still has implications today that I won't get into in too much detail, but having an actual specimen of something is foundational for the description of new species or for tracking how species change over time. And that's what herbaria do. And I won't get into detail about herbaria in this talk, but just so you know, you're in a way hybridizing nature journaling with a long tradition of pressing plants for voucher specimens. Another thing, besides the voucher concept, is composition. I think that pressing plants can teach you a lot about composition because you're forced to take an actual three-dimensional thing and fit it onto your two-dimensional paper in some way. And that is one of the main things you do in drawing. One of the main tasks of your brain in drawing is figuring out, how am I taking this three-dimensional thing and putting it onto two-dimensional paper? And you learn a lot about composition through pressing plants, and that will carry over into other aspects of your art. Speaking of carrying over into other aspects of your art, you can see that pressed plants can combine with scrapbooking, junk journaling, and other ways of collecting ephemera or using multimedia techniques. So pressed plants can combine with the more scientific and observational side of nature journaling, but it can also combine with art journaling and things like that. So here's an example of that. In general, it can be using pressed plants can be a learning tool. And this is where it's really helpful for nature journaling. It can help you learn botany. It can also help you as a learning tool with your gardening. You could be pressing plants through different seasons and learning about them, or also learning about the things that in this case ate this one. And it can also be combined with stewardship or rewilding practices as a learning tool. So that's all about learning. And then some more reasons to press plants are the aesthetic. I think there is definitely an aesthetic to press plants that can be hard to achieve through drawing. Look at that thistle, something that we might pull out of our garden or heaven forbid spray herbicides on. But even a plant such as a thistle can have a really nice aesthetic effect. Another one that I should mention tongue in cheek is pressing plants is a great way to spread diseases or seeds. So I will talk more about the ethics and legalities of this, but this is a part of a living animal or once living animal. So, you know, there's a whole lot of implications in terms of moving things around. But in the ethics section, I'll talk more about that. And then last but not least, I think that pressing plants, for especially for some people who are interested in botanical illustration, this can be a really great way to loosen up. So, and that's one of the themes of this workshop, is to loosen up. And this could unlock your botanical illustration. I think sometimes people get really uptight about the botanic illustration they see in the world today. People like Wendy Hollander and Laura Gastinger that have these amazing drawing techniques that they've built up over many years for very precise plants. You might feel like that's the only way to do it, but pressed plants for the rest of us can be a really great alternative. So I'm going to dive into some aspects of how to do this now that I explained why it can be useful. And the first one that I'm going to describe is plant selection. And I should point out that as you follow along with this class is a combination of demo and a combination of theory. If you don't have some of the materials that I'm using, don't worry. You could just sketch note this class and take notes and make drawings of what you see me presenting. If you have any plants around you or any of the other materials that I'm showing, feel free to try to use your materials, but you can also just take notes and do this on your own later. So we're going to get into the how right now. And the first part I want to talk about is finding the right plants. So my first example is the exact opposite of what you would want to try to press. And one of the reasons is this is a very three-dimensional thing. It's very hard. This is part of a plant. So I think it's important to consider pressing any plant, but this one in this case, this is very three-dimensional. Also, this would be something that would not be that hard for you to draw the outline of. It's not a very complex, challenging thing. Now let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum. Here is a plant that is not too woody. It's not too three-dimensional. It doesn't have too much water in it. It has some complexity to it, and it has white petals. White petals are hard to draw with watercolor. And so if you were nature journaling and you found something like this, or were curious about something like this growing as a weed in your garden, and you wanted to learn about this plant more, this would be a good choice, in my opinion, for pressing. You could use houseplants. So here's an example of houseplants. You can even use, I've used salad mixes from my refrigerator. So you can experiment with other things, but just so you know, you're looking for stuff that's not very three-dimensional. You're looking for stuff that might be challenging to draw, and it shouldn't be too wet or juicy. Okay, and then choosing the size you want. This is really important. So it's important, like this is a very big plant, and I could think, oh, I want a press that is big enough to fit this. What I recommend doing is thinking about what your final use is going to be. So for example, what I was showing you is in a 9x12 sketchbook. And if you have questions about materials, we can talk about materials later, and I can show you links. Let me put the desk down. But here you can see this sketchbook is 9x12. So if I'm going to do stuff like what I showed you here, then I want things that are pressed that are going to fit into this journal in an aesthetic way. And I've found through experience that it's really sad when you press a really nice big inflorescence like this, and then it doesn't fit into your sketchbook. So I'm very careful about not pressing stuff that's going to be too big, because if I want to put it in my sketchbook later and it's too big, it's really sad, and it can be hard to decide where to cut it, and the composition might not work. So with these hollyhock flowers that I'm going to press with you right now, I want to think about that. And the way that I've done that is I basically created my whole press system to work with the size of my sketchbook. So I now know through trial and error that I don't want to press anything in here that is not going to fit in my sketchbook. So we're going to get into this press a little bit, and I'm not going to talk a ton about materials right now because we could spend the whole class doing it. And I already showed you the two-step method. So remember, it's not all about the materials, and I will share links and more information about these later, but I don't want to take up the whole class. The important things that I'm going to share with you are concepts that will apply no matter how you're doing this. And one of them is going to be the importance of organization. So you can see I've got all of these tabs here to help me organize. I've also, made it clear that there's one side is down and up. I found that helpful as well. And the first thing that I have here, the only thing I'm going to mention here is just the size, right? So for now, I'm just going to mention the size that I have this press set up to work with the size of my sketchbook. So I'm going to make sure all my plant specimens are that size. So I'm going to put this over here for 1 second and talk a teeny bit more about plant specimens. This also brings up another topic, which is you need a lot of space when you're doing this. And so having like a large space is really important. Okay, one last thing is, so I said the size, I will cut this down, and I will also, when selecting the material, I'll sometimes remove parts of it. So I have my scissors here, and what I might do is I might remove some of the flowers and some of the fruit so that it will flatten down more, and you'll see that more in a second. I'm going to say a teeny bit about ethics and safety. It's good to remember that ethics is always something, it's a muscle that we have to practice. So you have to learn, and it depends on where you are. I don't like saying like, never do this. Going around telling people to never pick a wildflower ever is kind of a crazy thing, because it really depends. There could be wildflowers growing in their backyard that they planted. I think that with the ethics of plants, the most important thing is to learn about what the situation is where you live. Learn from someone else. You'll learn if there's any plants that you need to be worried about that might be poisonous, because that is a thing. There could be other hazards, and there's different legal stuff everywhere. So just so you know, look into the information for your particular area and make your own ethical and legal decisions that way. I think is the most important thing. I don't think the biggest problem in the world today is people picking flowers. And so I think there's a lot bigger problems. And the main thing I think is this is a way for us to learn about nature and connect to nature. And it depends on where you are. Look up the regulations where you are and make your own decisions. Okay, so we're gonna get into the pressing part now. I'll just talk a teeny bit about my system, but basically what you need is you need pressing paper, you need cardboard, and you might need tape. So a lot of times for pressing paper, I am just using this is backing paper, pressing paper. This is some resume paper. It's printer paper, but it's 100% cotton resume paper. And then I have tracing paper. And then I also have some black paper mixed in, but this is more like for backing paper. And on the top of my press, I have basically storage. Ideally, you have two presses and you have storage in one and you do active pressing in the other one. I currently have some storage in mine of finished stuff, but that's just because I don't have two presses. You could also just use a book. Here's some more backing paper, and this is what we're going to need right now. And this is tracing paper, and this is more of that printer paper, and I'll use those right now because we're going to press a couple things. It is a bit of a it can become a complicated process, and so it definitely requires some organization and also just repetition to figure out what your system is going to be like. Backing paper. Now I'm going to take out some of this cardboard, and this is cardboard that I basically scavenged and then cut to the dimensions that I need, more or less. Yeah, I've got 3. I need 4 of those at least. So I'm just getting this all set up so I'm ready to go here. Ideally, I would have a bigger table area. Okay, so this is one end of my press, and I'm just going to use that sort of as a place marker. Then I'm going to put down one piece of cardboard. Then I'm going to put down one piece of where did that other paper go? One piece of this resume paper. A lot of times the final plant won't stay stuck. You don't know which side it will stick to. So you might have this great plan and then it doesn't turn out the way you wanted. I'm going to start with the hollyhock here. And it's, as you can see, it's too big, right? And I don't want that. Also, this part of the stem is really fat. So I'm going to cut it way up here, actually. And this is a part where I might consider, you actually learn a lot of botanical illustration ideas through this. And if you study botanical illustration, you can see they're influenced by pressing the sort of stylistically influenced. And a lot of times botanical illustrations are done from pressed plants. So you can kind of see like, oh, the way that the plant is arranged and the flowers like ripped up and in the corner, and there's like little fruit here and an extra leaf, you know, it's very likely that that was a pressed plant that botanical illustrator worked from, or we're still sort of using a style that is based on some of this. So practicing this, you kind of learn more about the style. So here I have a couple options with this flower. I could flatten it completely this way and it would be closed, which is not the way that they look in real life. I could also cut it down the middle, try cutting it down the middle, or I could sort of fold part of it back and then flatten it that way. You definitely have to get in hands on here, and sometimes you have to break the flowers or smash them. So I'm going to try to see if I can fan it out a little bit. And for identifying the family and showing the important sort of taxonomy of the plant, these parts of the flower are actually really important, especially for this family. So I might even consider doing something where I dissect that. There's also this old flower that fell off. I could try to put that on there somewhere as well. And it's important to notice that these are pretty fleshy parts. So I'm going to want good ventilation. I'm in California and it's relatively dry here right now, but you do need good airflow, or else if I were in the tropics, I would be very I probably wouldn't do, if I were in a rainforest, I probably wouldn't do this at all, or I'd have a very different system um with like some kind of introduced heat. I am going to do one other thing here. I think I'm going to cut one of these in half and try that. And then I'm going to use some tape. So tape can help you position things. Yeah, that's really cool. Look at that. How cool the inside of the unopened flower is. And I might lose a lot of this. It's totally possible that it won't work, but that's part of pressing plants is you have to do a bunch and learn through doing. And it's super fun. It's actually addictive. Now would be a good time if there's a couple, if there's any questions that seem useful to ask at this stage. I could field a few questions, Ivea.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for this. We have a question starting out about what type of journal you used for your two-step method. And specifically, should we be concerned about the type of paper, like, for example, acid-free when pressing?
Yeah, I think all of those things are things to think about. And I think that even more important than that is your self-awareness there. So, for example, for me, I know through experience, through trial and error, that I often will overthink things and sometimes use that as an excuse for never trying something. Or just repeating the same things that come really comfortably for me and staying in sort of a comfort zone. So or just, like procrastinate and like research materials and spend forever making decisions. So what I've found is that sometimes for me, it's just liberating not to think about that kind of stuff at all, because I mean, people have been pressing flowers and plants in literally the worst paper ever possible. And people have done all kinds of crazy stuff pressing plants, or just stuck them in yellow page books, or dictionaries and Bibles. And I think that is a good reminder. So ideally, in terms of like the archivalness of plant matter, I think there's all of this is going to have acid in it, so nothing here is like really I think anything from a plant is going to have some degree of um it's going to change color over time, and it might affect the paper around it, and that's why people talk about archival this and archival that. um I think the most important thing is to know like what your goals are with the project, and whether or not you have a tendency to procrastinate and overthink all the little decisions about supplies, which is the case for me. Very good question though. So I'm probably going to intentionally try to forget that this is in there. And this is I can share the link for this later, but this is a Handbook Co. Pocket Panorama watercolor sketchbook. They're really nice and they fit in your pocket. And I think it would be a really fun journal just to fill up with pressed plants. It has elastic and it has this interesting format that I could later cut out, and fits well on my 9x12 pages either direction. So it's even like a rule of thirds with my 9x12 almost. So that could be fun. That's why I wanted to experiment with that. So good question. I'm going to point out one materials thing that I'm doing here for people who are watching is I decided to put down a little bit of the tracing paper underneath these two sides of the flower that I cut open, so it doesn't stick to that backing paper. And then I'm going to tape this here. And this is like really low stick artist tape that might just fall off like in one day anyways, but the main goal is just to hold them in place while I put the press down, because otherwise you can kind of try to squish everything very carefully and then squeeze it all down. But since we're going to be doing multiple plants, I'm going to try not to don't get too perfectionist about any of this. If you look at the way botanists have done this in the past, they're just slapping these things down here and smashing them. And so I think it's another self-awareness piece where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm getting like too OCD. So like, I just need to put down the sheet on top of it. And if I'm being scientific and, like you can include metadata and all of that stuff on here, I'm not really taking it to that level right now. But it is useful, especially if you're doing anything around like science and collecting or biodiversity. You need to have the metadata. This is just like a weed that I picked on the side of the office building. Okay, so then I would put that there, and then I would put one more cardboard, and I'll start doing the next plant and field another question.
Absolutely, and thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna stick to that subject of materials for a moment,
Yeah.
and specifically, Anonymous had asked what kind of diseases from the pressings, because you'd mentioned diseases earlier, I believe. So
Yeah, I was being a little bit I was joking a little bit, but I think that it's important to remember, and if we look at our history, we can see that we've moved a lot of things around the planet because we move a lot faster than things have for forever on this planet. So whenever you have like an actual plant like this, and this isn't to most people worry about this too. In some ways you could worry about this too much, but in certain situations, like if I'm going to go to the Galapagos Islands or I'm going to go to Hawaii, I'm not going to press plants, and I'm not going to take pressed plants to either of those places. Those are both places that are very sensitive, specifically because they're islands. And so that's the kind of thing where when you just know that when you're taking an animal or a plant and you're traveling long distances, you can be moving things around the planet in ways that aren't great. It depends on where you're going. And this is not something that you need to be like worrying about, but it is something to point out. Like, for example, if I'm going to the Galapagos Islands or I'm going somewhere that I know has a sensitive ecosystem, I'm going to be very careful. But it's also like you carry all that stuff on the bottom of your shoes too. So and that's unconsciously. So I think that if anything, this is an opportunity for us to just remember how interconnected we are, and that even if you're not moving pressed plants from one country to another, when you do go from one country to another, you're probably having stuff stuck on the bottom of your shoes, or in other ways you could be carrying seeds or something that you don't know of. And yeah, that's it. So like theoretically you could, for example, if you went to somewhere in the world that has banana plants that have this certain virus, and you collected a bunch of leaves there and put them in your press and kept them relatively wet, and then you traveled to one of the countries where they have like a quarantine because they have banana industry there, you could theoretically introduce something that would be an agricultural problem, but that's a very like theoretical example. Yeah, Eva, any other quick questions that I can do while I'm finishing up these two plants here?
okay, a quicker question. A couple of folks have asked what kind of tape that is that you're using and if it's masking tape.
Yeah, so this is one of those overpriced artists tape that I think there's so much variation. If you go to an art store or you go online and look at artists tape, there's so many different kinds, and so it's really hard for me to like make recommendations. But basically and masking tape sometimes is the exact same as artist tape and maybe at a cheaper price. but basically I think what you have to do is you have to try a few and just see like how sticky they are. And basically the rule of thumb with tape is, and you can do this with any tape, is you know, try sticking it on something first that isn't like your final thing, and like, is this going to ruin my paper? Like, put it down and peel it off. Does it rip a bunch of paper off, or does it like rip the plant when I pull it off? Is it too sticky, or is it not sticky enough? And so I think you just experiment with different tapes until you know, like, how sticky is this one? This one's super sticky. I only use it on these certain things. And then you have one that's like the least sticky possible, and you only use that in other things too, because you know it'll fall off. So this is some random pro something brand that I probably spent too much on, but you can even use this, and you can do the thing where you kind of try to take some of the, you put it on your clothes or whatever, and you try to take some of the adhesion off before using it, but just test it. So you could probably use this tape too for what I'm doing, but I would want to test it first. You can also use masking tape, and I'm not going to show that technique today, but you can use masking tape and just tape a plant into your journal right away. It's quick and dirty, but a lot of people do it, and there's some cool things. There's cool ways you can play with that that I'm not going to get into too much right now. But these right here are basically just weeds that were growing outside of this urban office building where I am, and these are really great plants to press and look at. And if you wanted to, you could just start nature journaling like right next to this, and you know, you could turn this into like a diagram. And like, I noticed that the stem has this sort of cross section, so I'm going to draw the stem cross section. And I think that this is where you can get really interesting with this stuff and sort of hybridize it with nature journaling, especially if you're very worried about drawing and you feel like you're not great at drawing. And then, you know, I could put in a question, because those are also a part of nature journaling, like how many seeds? And I don't even know if those are those seeds. And so the most boring thing, it would still be cool, but it would be boring, is, I'm just gonna say that if I just like looked up on, if I just Googled this plant and you know, just started writing information that I read off of Wikipedia on this paper, starting with like a cursive version of the scientific name, that's low, that's kind of, you know, that's fine. But I feel like there's so much more that you can do that can make it more personal, more creative. Like, you could write something, I always walk by this plant, I wonder what it is, even if you don't look it up. Or you could, you know, ask like someone that you know what they think about it. But just, there's a lot of directions this can go in besides just writing the name and just doing like a species profile. You could also see like you know, what is this the new one growing out here? And then you could try taking that off and planting it, or combine it with your gardening. Like, how was the harvest this year? You have some examples from your garden, or some pests, things like that. Okay, so now I'm just gonna close this one up here. Need one more sheet of paper, but I just wanted to show at least the couple pressings in my journal here. I'll do one more quick one and then close this up and go into the next part. And I'll take a question if there are any that seem relevant at this stage.
So one of the questions is if you could just outline again the layers of paper that you're using for pressing, just so that way people know, is it like one layer of cardboard, then vellum?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Yeah, so basically it's and you can fudge with this too. The rule of thumb is basically that or the concept. The concept is what you need to know. So basically you have, you know, you're taking a bunch of plants, right? And you could, if you wanted to, I could just smash all these leaves together like a sandwich like that, right? And just take all of the plants and then just smash them all inside of one piece of cardboard and one piece of paper. But if you think about it, a leaf pressed against another leaf, there's nowhere for that water to go, because that's one of the main things that's going to happen, is the plants are going to lose their water. And so this corrugated cardboard is it's made this way mainly for strength, but for us, it creates a situation that allows for air to flow through there. So having that is also on the opposite end of the spectrum from like this tracing paper. So I haven't done experiments, but I'm guessing this tracing paper doesn't pass water through it very easily and is not very absorbent, right? Like you wouldn't want to wipe your butt with this. So you want a certain balance between absorbent stuff and stuff that will let air flow through it, and maybe something like this that plants won't stick to. And then you can kind of just fudge around. That's the basic concept, right? Like, I'm not going to tell you that it's always one piece of cardboard, one piece of paper, one leaf of plant, another piece of paper, another cardboard. Because you might be in situations where, oh, I don't have that much cardboard, but I understand the principle here. So as long as I have like absorbent paper, I should be fine. You can experiment with it. But if you just start saving up cardboard and like cheap paper, or have some like baking paper mixed in, you can really do a lot. And then you just start experimenting and see what works. And then adapt as you go. Just use it like your journal, and you can make notes like, I used this paper and it didn't work. Now I'm going to use this other cardboard combined with baking paper and see how that goes. And you use it like a journal and a learning tool. Okay, so I'm going to do one more. And if you have issues with drying, you need to start, like if it's a humid time of year or you live in a tropical place, not all tropical places are wet, but like a very wet and humid place, this might not be the best system for you. You might want to use like, there's a microwave press that I can share later. And you also might want to think about how to use your car. Leaving stuff in your cars, your press in your car is a really good place to dry stuff out. There's even ways you could use your oven. And now I'm going to put a backing, not a backing paper, running out of my paper here. I'll just put this one. And then I'm going to put these all into the press and we'll move on to the next part. So it's a little bit hard to manage this space. So down here in my press, I have this tab right here that says fresh press. And I'll show you some of the stuff that I pressed yesterday, and then I'll put these ones all away. And put that on top of those. So these are all my new ones. So I can squish them down. They'll probably move a little bit. That's why trying to be very precise is hard. I might mess up some of these ones from yesterday, but I wanted to just show them to you before we go on to the next stage. So here is a hollyhock that I pressed yesterday. And usually I won't open and mess around with stuff until like a few days later. But if I'm worried about mold, I could come in here, and what I want to show you, check this out. You can see the places where it's sticking. That is why I use that's why I instinctively use the tracing paper on this one. And it'll probably stick onto this paper behind it, and I might end up using that as where I mount it to. But you can see that the tracing paper doesn't get as stuck to the juicy parts of the plant as the regular paper does. It doesn't look that elegant. Some of the petals are a little bit messed up, but I think it gets the essence of the flower a little bit more than if I had tried to just close the whole thing. There are also some interesting insects on this one, so I made notes about those insects that I can look up later. And so then you can see that one has a tracing paper on top and some kind of cheap drawing paper underneath.
Well, Marley,
Here-
just giving you a quick time check.
Yep.
We're about 40 minutes in, and I know you wanted to leave time at the end for questions, though you've been taking them so wonderfully that we may not need as much time at the end, but just wanted to give you a time check. We are 40 minutes in.
Great. So is that our halfway? That's a little more than halfway.
Yes.
Okay. I really like that way that thing came out. I should do more of those. So anyways, these are some of the ones I did yesterday. They still have a lot of moisture and a lot of time to go. and I will probably put them in my car somewhere warm and speed up the drying. And so then I want to make sure that I can see that these are the fresh pressed ones. This is the hardest part for me is the organization of all of these sections. But I think the way that it works best, this kind of pressing, is if you go on a trip and you go and do one day where you're like, I'm gonna harvest a bunch of plants in my garden, or maybe people are doing a weed removal project and there's a bunch of interesting weeds, or something's gonna get mowed. You could go in there and collect and fill your entire press, and then come back to it later and do stuff with it. And that's what we're going to do next, is we're going to do stuff with it. I'm currently, just for people who are curious, I have a whole list of all this stuff that I can post later, but I use these straps now. This press originally came with these wing nuts that were very, very ineffective. And then for a while I used clamps, and those were fun but also not super effective. This is the back side. I messed it up. Now I use these straps. They're not ratchet straps, but they work. Okay, so I got my orientation right. Now I just need to put my straps down. So after going through that, you can see why the two-step method has some benefits, especially if you're just going to be casual about this. But what I found is, if you're a nature nerd like me, and you're into like weird creative stuff too in your journals, then this gets addictive really fast. And pretty soon what's going to happen is, everywhere you look, you're just gonna be like, oh, I want to press that plant. I want to press that plant. And you can press old flower arrangements too and save them, for example. So there's a lot of you'll probably end up wanting to just collect more and more and more. And then you get to a point where it's like, wow, what am I gonna do with all of this? And so that's what we can talk about right now. And let me make sure I get some of these finished ones out. This is why I should have a place for storing finished ones that's not in my main press. But we're gonna talk about Mod Podge and backing paper. Here we go. Storage. We're gonna talk about how to take these finished ones and do stuff with them. Here are some nice flowers, more flowers. Okay, because you're gonna collect all of this stuff, it's kind of like taking pictures of plants. It can be sort of passive, and it might not be, it's definitely not as good of a learning experience as like nature journaling. And the same can happen with the pressing, is you might just get into the like, I want to collect all of these things, and then they're just all sitting in your press and you might not even remember much about them. So you can take them later and restudy them and reincorporate them into your art. And that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to use toned paper. You can see this is pressing can be done with animals as well. And first I should say, I didn't intentionally smash and press that spider, but it got squished between two books. And since I had Mod Podge ready and I had been pressing plants, I was like, I could probably just, put Mod Podge and preserve it onto my cover. And so that spider was sadly and accidentally smashed between two books that were like on the shelf or something. And when I saw it, I decided to memorialize it by Mod Podging it there. Okay, so Mod Podge is the first thing we're gonna do, and I'm just gonna show it to you as a really basic thing. These didn't have Mod Podge on them, and they looked really cool, but then they started getting eaten by bugs. So Mod Podge works as like a sealer. It can also even work with things that are sort of spiny, or for whatever reason you had something that was sort of toxic, to topically, you could put Mod Podge over it, and it's basically sealing it in. Microwaving is also a way to theoretically kill stuff that's on there, even though I have seen ants come out of the microwave completely alive before. So that's that. Okay, we're gonna paint Mod Podge onto these, and what that means is we have to choose our backing paper. In this case, I did press them on black paper, and this one sort of stayed in place, but a lot of times the stuff won't stay in place when you do it. So be prepared to move it onto a different paper. Here you can see one that's already been Mod Podged, and we're gonna play with that one in a second. But first, and this is one of those things where it's good to sort of bulk your tasks, like, or it's called batching, batch your tasks. So you do the same thing a bunch of times. And then like while everything's drying, you can do something else. So I'm going to get everything that I have that's ready to seal with Mod Podge. That might be it. Okay. And then I'm just going to pour out the Mod Podge. And then I'm going to take a brush, and first I'm going to put what I want as the adhesive. So I'm basically going to put where I think they're going to go on top of. So this is going to stick them down. This is going to go underneath them. And this is the part that's hard if the plant gets stuck to the original paper and you're like, oh, great, it's stuck on my original paper. It makes it a little bit hard to paint glue underneath it. And that's what the Mod Podge is doing, is first it's gluing them down. If you are patient, you can do this and then wait completely for them to dry before you paint the layer on top, because they try to move around. But if you're impatient, it is possible a lot of times to get away with painting the sealing layer, the coating layer afterwards. I mean, at the same time. So right now I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to show you what it would look like. I would definitely try to use my tweezers, for example, so the flower doesn't move around, because the flower can also, you know, you might pull out petals, especially if it's a delicate flower. The petal could get pulled out by the sort of friction of me going over with the brush right now. In this case, it's a fused petal. It's a corolla with this calyx here. And sometimes when I do these flowers, see how this one's pulled out of the calyx? It just has the corolla. It doesn't have that thing. On this one, it was a danger because some of them were already eaten, that as I paint them, they get pulled out of that part there. That's why you should wait. But if you have tweezers and you go like this, you can usually sort of fudge it. And with a really delicate flower, I might not do that. Here, I definitely want plenty of Mod Podge to cover up this stem, but I'm not going to mix water into the Mod Podge. I used to do that, but I think then it just gets everything. You have to be careful with that because it just dries way slower. And it looks really bad right now, but this Mod Podge should dry clear. And you don't want to close, if this is inside your journal, the worst thing that you want to do is glue journal pages together that you can then never open those pages. It's kind of mysterious afterwards, actually. But I have heard of people accidentally in a journal full of charcoal and graphite drawings, they thought they were using a spray fixative, sort of like the way this Mod Podge can be a cover layer, but they were actually spraying a spray adhesive on all of their journal pages. And then when they got to the end, they tried to open it and they had basically glued their entire journal closed. And let that be a lesson for the rest of us. Sometimes these colors change, and I've tried to track, you know, how to preserve the colors. I think if you really want to preserve colors, it's going to depend on the plant, but you probably want to try that microwave technique and the microwave press. I have a whole list, a shopping list with Amazon affiliate links, and I know Amazon isn't the best company, and I think it's really important to shop from other companies that aren't Amazon, but it's also one of the few ways that I make a living as a full-time nature journal educator and artist. So I do use it, and I do know some people shop there, and I have a complete list of all the supplies that I use for this with Amazon links, so then I can maybe get a little bit of money when you buy through those links. But if not, you can just use it as information and buy at another store. So these will dry and they will be clear. Like this has a whole layer of Mod Podge on it, and look how clear it looks. This is the matte. I use the matte version of Mod Podge. And then one of the things you can do is once they're dry, you can cut these out. And you can probably already imagine a million ways that you would utilize this and all the different directions this can go in. But one of the things I like to do is these cutouts, and it can create a nice contrast, and you can get really creative with it. And this, for example, would contrast a lot on white paper. This you could even glue onto the cover of a journal, or you could make cards. There's a lot of directions you can go with this. One thing that I think is really important in terms of nature journaling is you can have a lot of chronology and context problems, because you might get really into pressing for like a couple weeks in the spring. Then you press all these flowers. You could have maybe dozens or hundreds, and they could be from different places that you don't remember. And maybe you were nature journaling at the same time on that trip. So then months go by, the plants are all dry now. You decide you want to incorporate them into your nature journal. You might not have space in your nature journal from the pages you did on that trip to then insert those plants with the rest of the context. So I just want to bring this up because it's something that I nerd out about a lot, is how to sort of track chronology versus other topics in our nature journals. And we just default to chronology all the time because it's a journal. But there are other ways to experiment with that. And I think one of the downsides with these pressed plants is they often end up disconnected from that sort of chronology that we carry in our nature journal, and we might lose the context a little bit. I mentioned already to have one press. Ideally, you'd have one press for the field that you are collecting in, and then you have one press for storing. Like, what am I supposed to do with all these, like, that have Mod Podge on them, and maybe they're on nice backing paper? Having a place to store all of those, or plants that are pressed and dry and ready to be Mod Podged, it can be a problem. So having two different ones is useful. And then a couple other things, if you don't have access to cool plants, or you feel like you don't have access to cool plants, check for weeds. We pressed one sow thistle today, which is a very common weed. You can also look at houseplants, or if you're like in a mall, and maybe just, you know, like if you really need to and you're in an urban area and there's a mall and there's some houseplants and you can just take a few leaves, I think that would probably be ethical. If it allows you to connect with nature and learn about plants, I think it's probably okay. This is one I picked in an office building, you know, it's like one leaf that's already starting to go bad. This maybe would be really cool on black paper. You know, there's in terms of access, you can often find weeds growing up in the sidewalks that can actually be really interesting. Even things like this. So keeping your eyes open. You can try salad mix. I've had mixed results with that, but don't discount anything automatically. Maybe things from the grocery store. What else? If you don't have any of this stuff, remember the first method that I showed. You basically take a plant, you put it inside and you close it. You could use a dictionary. you could find old dictionaries or encyclopedias and just start sticking plants in there. If you put it in a window or somewhere that gets ventilation, you'll rarely have issues with mold unless you live in a tropical rainforest. Packing tape and clear envelopes is also a good strategy. You could keep I always, in the back of my nature journals, I always have an envelope or pocket. So if I needed to, I could stick a plant into this pocket. Now it's not going to open because there's nothing in it. But this here is a pocket, and I could stick at the very least, I could just stick a plant in there and store it, or something like this that has a strap. Another really quickie would be I basically always have this with me. And I always have some type of tape in my nature journal field kit. I don't have the rest of this stuff, but I could at the very least take a leaf of something, or if I find like a seed on the ground, I could just take a little bit of tape and put that directly into my journal. And whether I remove that later or turn it into like a permanent thing, it's very easy just to tape a little leaf into your journal. So there's a spectrum here. You don't have to get all into all of these tools that I mentioned or have a press to be able to do this. All right, I think are we close to the Q&A time?
We're fairly close. We're at 10:56, and I know that you wanted to begin the Q&A at 11:10. So we've got a little bit more time.
Sure. Okay, why don't we go into Q&A, and then if some of it requires me to demo stuff, I can do that.
Sounds perfect. Okay, so our first Q&A question, this one is a bit briefer, and it jumps back to something you'd said at the beginning. One of our participants was asking for a definition of junk journaling. What does junk journaling mean?
Great. I have a little bit of junk in my throat, but let's see if I can define junk journaling without coughing. So, junk journaling, I think, is just a fun name. I don't know where it came about, and in some ways it overlaps with aspects of scrapbooking, and then some people use the term art journaling, and it's probably also one of those things that if you wanted to, you could get into arguments with people online about what the different definitions of each one are. But I think junk journaling, in my definition, is if you are collecting ephemera, you're taking multimedia tools, you're using tape and maybe unconventional materials and gluing them into your journal instead of just drawing and writing. So it's a lot of multimedia techniques. I did a whole class about how to combine it with nature journaling last year at the Wild Wonder Conference in 2024. But maybe you have spore prints and you have like cutout paper and stuff like that. Receipts, sometimes it could be like ripped up envelopes from your recycle bin or anything like that. Good question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. We had a couple of questions about that subject of time.
Yeah, great.
So one person was asking, in general, what's the range of time or days what it would take for a press to be called finished? And one person asked more specifically, for a fresh flower like that pink one done earlier, how long will it take?
Yeah, so these are the kinds of questions that I'm going to say it depends. And it depends on so many variables that in my opinion, I can't give you a useful answer. What I can give you is just the encouragement that you try things and you observe them, and that it's something that you can do. And sometimes I think we think about like the specifics too much. And for example, like depending on this plant right here that I just stuck into this thing, in my like climate, and depending on like this plant, if I throw this in the back of my car in where I'm at in California right now, I could probably paint Mod Podge over in like 2 days, and it would probably be almost completely dry. But if I were in Ecuador right now, on the Amazonian side where I spend a lot of time, I wouldn't even try doing that because I would have mold growing on the outside of my sketchbook, even with no plants inside of it. I think it really depends, and it could probably range from 1 day to never dry. But most likely, if you live in the temperate United States or Canada, it'll probably it'll probably take less than a week for your inside your house for the one of these plants to dry in the press. Good question.
That makes total sense. Somebody was asking about what you would do differently in a tropical environment.
Yeah, so I mean, so the what some of the plant explorers did is they would they would dip these plants like into some kind of alcohol or something even before putting it into a press, and then they would have some kind of like kerosene lamp or fire that is using hot air from the fire, because fires also dry the air out, and then using that to artificially dry. Today, I think they use dehydrators and stuff in the tropics to do it. But yeah, I wouldn't even mess with this. I would just be drawing in my journal, probably.
Fair enough. And actually, on that note about drawing in your journal and combining those two, since the color will fade in the pressed flower, do you ever try to paint a swatch of the color next to the pressed plant so you can remember the fresh color?
That's a really good idea. Yeah, I love that idea. I don't think I've done it exactly in that way, but that is a really good idea. Like on this one, I could have done that. These salvias can retain a fair amount of their color. Um, but yeah, no, that's a great idea. I love that idea. Definitely would love to see someone try that.
Oh, on the subject of that salvia that you just held up on the
Mhm.
did you paint the Mod Podge over the tape?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so basically this one, I did that style, and I can show you an example where it really makes a difference. But I did the style where I use the tape to kind of control how the plant is flattened onto the paper. And so the tape, and this was the original. So this is an example where the original pressing paper becomes the backing paper. So this is the same paper the plant was pressed on, and it was stuck to the paper, which can be good or not good. And in this case, I think I was planning for it to stick on this paper as the final paper. And I used tape to help hold it and create like a nice composition. And then I forgot about it. You know, it was sitting in my press for some months, or a year, maybe even more than a year, and these bugs started to eat it, and the bugs were eating and really messing it up, and then I got all sad, and then I was like, well, I could still Mod Podge over it and do something with it, and even it might be interesting that the bugs ate it. And so I just painted over everything, the tape, the bugs, and everything. And I have another example of one like that. Where is it? That really requires the tape to hold it into the position. You could try to take the tape off afterwards and then Mod Podge it, but I feel like the tape can actually create this interesting look. And the herbarium specimens, if you look at the herbarium specimens, they often have the tape still on them, and sometimes it looks kind of like the botanist wasn't being very artistic about it. But it can also, I feel like, sometimes just have a nice aesthetic. I can't find that other example that's that shows you how it's really easy to lose track of where things are. Oh, here it is. Here it is. So check this one out. This one I intentionally used. See how it's kind of spread this way? I also made it so you can see the underside of one of the leaves, because sometimes that's helpful for identification. So I spread this out so you could really see these, and I removed some of the flowers. This is a good example of where I simplified the plant. Um, to kind of make it display it in this particular way more. And I use the tape. The tape is a very central part of the positioning, and I think it kind of becomes part of the composition as well. So those were ones where I got like more artistic with the placement and the tape. And I think it has potential. It's kind of fun aesthetically. Good question. Thanks for asking that.
And I'm going to note I am inclined to agree about the tape being its own aesthetic, because then you're able, it's sort of like the shown your work thing. You're able to see the work of the person who did the work. And as for if you're also hoping to do that yourself, it can be super instructional. So
Yeah, and it also it's like more it's the whole process is very tactile, and so I think this is really good for nature journalers or nature artists, because it's really easy to get in this abstract mode, especially when we're just watching videos and looking at photos online and drawing from like photos on our phone. If you're holding this plant and like touching it and like moving it into different positions, I feel like it really is, it's more playful, and it's more tactile. It uses more of your brain, and I think that it can be a really helpful for our learning.
most definitely. We had a couple of other questions about the Mod Podge, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's go.
So just to clarify, does the Mod Podge help, like the same way that it sort of preserved the bug bites, which I think is pretty interesting? Does it also somewhat keep the colors from fading?
It does, and I have, it's weird because I have some where the colors are so good, and I have some where the colors have faded a lot, and I'm not sure what it is, but like, I mean, that has pretty good, I would say that has pretty good color, and but I also have ones that don't have Mod Podge over them that the color has stayed good. So I'm not totally sure. Or like I've experimented with putting the Mod Podge on while the flower is fresher, or waiting until it's older. I think that's the kind of thing that if you're so inclined, you can experiment with and try to see if you can figure that out. The answer to that question yourself through experimentation would be really fun. But so far, I haven't been able to clearly understand what are the different variable. I mean, there's obvious ones that we know about through reading and stuff, that like, oh, light and oh, temperature are usually bad for color degradation, and oh, the humidity is also bad. But like, I know those things in theory, but it's not something that I've experimented with carefully enough to be able to say that I can know that for sure from firsthand experience.
That's a really good reminder that we should also be willing to experiment with this and
Yeah,
take chances, make mistakes, and get messy, to quote Mrs. Frizzle.
yeah, exactly.
Um, Somebody had asked about spray on Mod Podge, if that would work too, or if you don't have Mod Podge, can you use white glue like Elmer's, and if it needs to be diluted? And I'm guessing that the answer to this is experiment.
That, well, it sounds like that person is already is already experimenting with these materials, or is at least making themselves like knowledgeable about the materials, which I think is really good and really important. I haven't tried the spray on Mod Podge. I think that it would work well. I've seen it. I was just, going over some materials this morning, and I saw that there is such a thing. I haven't used it. I think in a lot of ways spray on would be better, because you're not especially with really delicate flowers, it gets really hectic when you're painting and like the petals are coming off. So especially if it's something that you really care about and it's already dry and really nice, I think a spray on sealant is the ideal, like is it sounds really ideal. I haven't experimented with it to know what it's like, but just the idea that you're spraying something on instead of actively like touching it makes a lot of sense. I think Elmer's glue, I would definitely try it, and take notes about what supplies you try. I always try to have like a tools used page. Let me see if I can find one here. A tools used page in the back of my nature journal where I track like what supplies I used. This isn't the best one, but here you can see, oh, here we go. This one's way better. Oh no, never mind. Okay, so here I try to, at the back of every journal, I write down like what adhesives I use. This one's not filled out yet. What drawing tools I used and like on what pages. So because it really sucks if you use a material like Elmer's glue, for example, and then like a year later or 6 months later, there's something crazy happening. It's all like deteriorating or turning pink. It's really helpful if you know what material you used that time, but if you don't have that written down anywhere, you're kind of out of luck. So I would definitely try Elmer's, and I would keep track of like what I used where. Good question. I'm gonna keep pressing flowers while we field the rest of more questions.
Excellent, and thank you. A question for clarification.
Yeah.
One participant asks, should drying and pressing be two separate processes?
Oh, that's interesting. Usually it's basically happening at the same time, and I think they're related. If you want something to dry out faster, one way is you can squish it. And so I think they're basically happening at the same time, and you could probably try to separate them, but I don't know. They're basically happening at the same. If they're basically one in the same in this case. Yeah.
Um, okay, thank you for that. And a new question came in asking, what is the black paper you're using?
Yeah, I use a lot of different black paper, and the one that I have in my supply list that I can share or post on my website is the Stillman and Burn Nova series trio. You can get a sketchbook that has 3 different kinds of toned paper in it. It has this the one that I showed earlier, which is tan. It has black and it has gray. But I probably right now have been using like 3 different kinds of black paper. So I have like some really cheap craft paper. When I got really into pressing, I just went to the art store and bought some of the cheapest papers that they had. And I wanted the cheapest black paper that they had. And I think this was that. This is a different one. This is like a Strathmore. This is like a fancy black paper. And then I went to a thrift store and found this is like some cardstock. Um, but yeah, so I think just almost any black paper. I think if you're going to be doing a lot of pressing, you need to get some really cheap paper because you're going to go through a lot of paper.
That's good. And I like that reminder to experiment with different what different papers you're putting things on because it will have different results.
Yeah, like I mean, I got all this. This is like baking paper that I've used multiple times, and this is what I was using before the tracing paper. It was also I didn't have any money to spend on tracing paper, so I got this, and that can totally work too. And just start collecting a bunch of I would say cheap paper. And you'll get a lot of these you'll get a reuse, and they kind of end up with interesting like texture and marks on them from getting reused. And at first I used to be like OCD about that, but now I kind of like that some of these older papers you can see it's a little bit hard with the camera, but you can see the imprints of previous plants.
Definitely. Do you ever play around with washi tape?
I bought a bunch of washi tape before I taught the last year, 2024, I taught a class at the Wild Wonder Nature Journaling Conference about how to combine junk journaling and nature journaling techniques. And I bought a whole bunch of washi tape before that. And I had mixed experiences with it. So I mean, I think there's just so many out there that there's a lot of brands, but I didn't like the balance between adhesion and lack of adhesion. It was nice to have different colors. So like I'm sure if you had some really cool colors and thought about how they would combine with different plants or contrast with the paper, like if you put a plant on black paper and then had like a really nice like pastel pink color, and then you have a green plant, that would be like washi tape this color right here and maybe a pale green or a pale yellow. I think you could do a lot of really interesting aesthetic things. It would definitely be worth it, and just find one that has that adhesion balance that works for you.
Thank you. And a question for clarification that another person asks, what was the reason for using the tracing paper underneath the two parts of the hollyhock?
Yeah, so the tracing paper, it seems like to me that the more absorbent and sort of soft the paper is, and maybe the more texture it has on the surface, the more likely a plant is going to get stuck to that. So the first thing that I did for that is I started saying, okay, because originally when I started pressing these things, I was always imagining like, oh, the plant is gonna stay permanently stuck onto the paper that you put it on. And then so I would plan for that. I'll be like, oh, this is gonna be so cool. And then, for example, I would press these 5 plants right here. And then when I peel them apart, 2 of them would be stuck on one page and 3 of them will be stuck on the other page. So then your composition doesn't work. And so then I learned later with time, like, oh, actually, I'm pressing it on this paper and then I can remove it from this paper once it's dry and put it on my final backing paper. But then you need to know, you need to control what it's sticking to or what it's not sticking to. Now, I do like it if they stick to the original pressing paper. I do like it sometimes. It looks nice. So I just want to keep them there on that page. So then I started using tracing paper on this side, or this oven paper, just so that they would stick on the paper that I wanted instead of sticking on whatever's on top of them. You know what I'm saying? And so then with that hollyhock, it was a particularly juicy looking part. And so if it's so juicy and sticky looking, I want it to be against tracing paper. And if I was doing something really sticky, I might use tracing paper on both sides, but I would also make sure to make it really thin. So like you could get really surgical with this and experiment with like, what if I cut like really thin strips of seaweed or really thin strips of fruit? I feel like fruit is something that you don't have to you don't normally press because it's so sticky and juicy, but you could probably cut it super thin if you got really into it and then figure out a way. Like what I'm trying to say is that if you understand the principles, like here I'm doing these really sticky fruit, they're extremely sticky. They have a mucilage, which is characteristic of this family. Okra is also in this family. I might use the I'm going to use the I'm going to use this really smooth tracing paper on both sides and see if I can press it that way. And if I use that microwave press, I could probably for sure get away with stuff like this, but I don't have that, so I'll just try this. It's an experiment. Good question though. I'm just going to keep pressing stuff as we go through questions.
Sounds good. Marley, this is Beth.
Oh, yay.
Hey,
Means we're getting close to the end.
we still have a little bit more time.
Okay.
I was just wanting to see if you could show us some more examples. I know at the beginning you kind of flipped through, but I think
Yeah.
people would love to see some more examples
Okay.
of things you've already pressed if you have.
Oh, I've already pressed. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't have a ton. I am currently nomadic, so which means I don't have like a home for storing large amounts of stuff. And so I don't have all of my past journals with me. It's just lucky that I have this one. Are you talking about finished pressed or finished already like inserted into my book?
Either way, I think it's fun for people to see
Okay.
examples. Yeah.
Sure, yeah, I'll go through a little bit more here. This is sort of some junk journaling actually, and here you can see that similar to the ones that we painted today, the salvia, I think it's Gesneriflora. I had some of them just lying around ready to go, and these could be I think they have Mod Podge on both sides of them. And I feel like they're really nice as sort of like a page ender, so you could
So for those,
save
did you
them.
press them there or were they pressed elsewhere and
No,
then pasted
definitely
in?
not. These were pressed in my main press and then later inserted into my journal. And I think
Okay.
that's a good example of why Like this is, I wouldn't even consider this spread nature journaling. I would consider this art journaling. There's no information about where these flowers were collected or any direct observations of mine. They're sort of out of context, and I'm using them more just as a purely aesthetic element. And so I would consider that more like art journaling. Sorry, there's the cleaners are here at the co-working space.
We
And so
can't
this
hear it.
is
It's okay.
okay, good. These are all basically like the examples that I have with me are all basically like art journaling examples, because they're sort of separated from the information. And one of the reasons why that happens is like what you're asking is they weren't pressed into this journal. They were pressed separate, and you often end up with this sort of context and chronology gap that I mentioned before. That's why, you know, if you do it the way where a really quick way where I just tape that one leaf, that is a better method because for nature journaling, because it's more immediate. Can't even find where that leaf is. That one. So like if I just taped it in there, I couldn't Mod Podge or anything. A lot of this stuff is more like studio stuff. That's why the just taping straight in and some of those techniques I showed at the end are more applicable for nature journaling in the field.
Okay, cool. Thank you. A couple of people are wondering if you use silica gel ever to dry plants before you put them in.
Silica gel is, I would call it a very passive way for drying things. So I think sometimes because of the way that they're marketed, they have this sort of like magic sachet feeling, and we just throw them into things and are like, oh, it's gonna solve everything. I think it's really important with silica gel to realize how much humidity you have in your air and in your environment, and depending on where you are, if you're not able to enclose a really small amount of air, I think silica gel is not worth it. So if you can't close, like if I put all of my journals inside a really tight like vacuum bag and then put silica gel that is new or that I know is dry inside of that bag, I think it can have an impact on drying. But I think that it's not a very powerful way of extracting moisture, especially if there is a lot of moisture. You're definitely going to want something that's more active, such as like the heat from your car. Just being inside of a parked car is going to make a way bigger difference than silica gel. And silica gel can be reused, and I do reuse it. You can put it in a pan, take it out of, you basically have to dehydrate it. So you can either do that in a pan, or you can leave them in the sun, things like that.
Okay,
But
cool.
they can absorb moisture too, and then you could just be putting a moist silica gel. I think a lot of times people are using silica gel packets that have moisture that it's already absorbed. It doesn't absorb any more moisture.
Okay, good to know. Another person was wondering if you've ever laminated the pressed plant and then stuck it in your journal.
I haven't, but that's a good thing to try. If I had a lamination machine that I could play around with, I definitely would. I think that's definitely worth experimenting with.
And then someone else was wondering about the index in your journal and if you could talk a little bit about how you make that.
Oh, no, I can't talk about that
It's
because
a big, it's a big question, yeah.
yeah, I just indexed my notes from Wild Wonder, and I probably spent like over 30 hours just like coming up with an indexing system for my notes from Wild Wonder. So
Wow.
yeah, just start experimenting with it and just start trying different ways of organizing information. Basically, you just have to start trying it. If you're interested in indexing, I think it's an underappreciated art form.
All right, can you bring your face back on while we say goodbye?
Yeah, I will. Let's go here.
All right, take a bow. Yay, thank you
I
so
have
much.
plans to take off
Oh
here.
yeah, cool. Thank you so much for this fun class, Marley. We really appreciate it. And a reminder that the Wild Wonder Foundation hosted this class. We're so grateful to Marley, and all the funds raised will help support our free and low-cost programs. A big thanks to Vea who helped backstage. And we'll be emailing everybody a link to the recording from today's class by October 15th. And in that email, we'll include some other information that Marley might want to share with you, and we'll send you a survey as well. And lastly, if you took notes from class or want to share some of your pressed plants, we'd love to see them. Please post them on socials and tag us, Wild Wonder Foundation. You can tag at Marley Peifer. And if you enjoyed today's class and would like to make a donation, you can do so at wildwonder.org/donate. Thank you again, Marley, so much. This was really fun.
Yay. Remember, everybody, you can keep it simple. You can do this.
Yep. Yep. You gave us a lot of really fun ideas and a lot of good on-ramps to trying this out. So thank you so much, Marley. That was really fun.
Bye.
And thanks to Avea for your help. Bye.
Thanks, Ivea. Bye.